General, my producer told me earlier that you have been using the word terrorism. How do you find that word in this?
Well, that's very easy, Tom. Anytime a person murders 149 people plus himself, that is a terrorist act. Now, the ideology behind it may be different. It may be radical Islam, in which he becomes a martyr, a shaheed, and goes to paradise and gets 72 virgins, or it may be because he's a disgruntled employee, or as the White House calls, a violent extremist. We do not know yet the ideology, but we can focus now on him. And he'd obviously pre-planned it because his web page has been cleaned up and a number of other things, and he didn't know when the pilot was going to go out. But we need to take a deep dive into this man's personal life. What
the Air Force, I think more than the airlines do some sort of psychological screening when they hire pilots, but that seems to be it. The Air Force seems to be more intent on looking at the psychological profile of the people who they fly planes.
Absolutely. I mean, many of my years had nuclear alert or nuclear alert units underneath my command, and so we take it very seriously. I was surprised to hear that, number one, that GermanWings does not have a two-man policy. In other words, in U.S. airlines, you've always got to have two people in the cockpit, nor do they have a deep psychological testing process. Whether it's politically correct or whatever it is, I'm sure it's going to change very quickly, but you can see why it's very important as we understand what really happened, why it's important that you do have these psychological tests.
It does, and I think your point about the fact that you never leave in the U.S. protocol is never leave one person in the cockpit because of this perfect example. It also, the plane has now been acquitted because a lot of people were asking how safe is the plane. Obviously, the plane flew fine. Correct.
And the reason we know is because when the pilot put the correct code in the door to get in, it was overridden. It meant a human had to override it. The other reason we know it was the co-pilot and it was done intentionally was the altitude for the descent was set around 3,000 feet. We have those instrumented records. And that is a normal, what we would call a high-speed jet penetration in the old days. Not too steep. It didn't drop out of the sky. It was really normal, probably in maybe 10 degrees nose down. So we know those things. And the final thing is the pilot, the aircraft didn't get a fly-up command. He had to override that because in the Airbus, as it gets close to the ground, it'll give it a fly-up command. So those three things clearly tell us that the co-pilot deliberately did this.
Very good point. Very good points. General McInerney, thank you so much for your expertise. Glad you could join us.